Okay, hey everybody, welcome to the first episode of the Climate Con podcast. This is quite a monumental moment in the history of fighting back against the Climate Con, I'd say. And I'm joined by a very interesting guest today as a member of the CO2 Coalition. So we've got Gregory Wrightstone here, and we're going to get into, well, all things related to CO2 and why actually we want more of it. It's actually a good thing to have around, which can be quite a controversial thing to say in of itself. So, Gregory, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's good to be on with you. Glad to talk with you. I understand we have an hour. I could probably go 5 hours, so we'll
Maybe do a
try and
few
get
shows, yeah.
Okay. Well, there's a
Yes.
lot of this is just fascinating information that many of your viewers have never heard. So I'm anxious to get going here.
Sure. And so, what was it that sort of first started you on this journey and being a member of the CO2 Coalition?
Yeah, I'm a geologist by training, and I did some of the first. I wrote actually the first peer-reviewed comprehensive paper on the largest natural gas field in the world, the Marcellus Shale. So I was involved in some of the early shale gas development, fought back against the misinformation on fracking. And then I got into this subject matter as a scientist. I've always been a strong proponent of the scientific process. And there was so much we heard about climate change, and there were some parts of climate change that I knew were just wrong. In particular, this claim of ocean acidification, which I knew as a geologist to be just absolutely flat out impossible. Just quickly, I'll delve into that just quickly, and that's because at 420 parts per million right now, the ocean's never acidified. When we got to 8,000, 20 times as much CO2 in the atmosphere, and our ocean's never acidified, and they're not going to now. And life is flourishing in the oceans because of more CO2. But I got into that, and so I suspected, I knew that was wrong. I suspected other things were wrong. So I said, what I'm going to do is do a deep dive into the facts of these various processes and what we're being told is climate apocalypse events. And what I found,
Yes.
Travis, was frankly infuriated me. It angered me. As a scientist, I value, as I said, the scientific process. And I found that we're being fed a bunch of hooey, if you will, just climate lies about so many of these events that are claimed to be happening and getting worse. And so this led me, it was a personal search for the truth about climate change. And it led to me writing my first book, Inconvenient Facts. That book now is approaching 100,000 sales of one of the top climate books, or books on climate, over the last 5 years. And then I joined the CO2. Yeah. I joined the CO2 Coalition as their executive director 2 years ago. And what we are at the CO2 Coalition is a group of scientists, most of the top scientists in the world that push back against this catastrophic climate crisis claim. And our main focus here is on the benefits of the combination of modest warming and increased CO2. And again, we have mostly PhDs, we've physicists, chemists. I'm a geologist. We have energy experts. We have economists, but for the most part, our members and our board are PhD scientists. Will Happer, emeritus chairman at Princeton of physics, actually designed the Guide Star laser, invented the earliest MRI machines, received the awards for patents as the top inventor for the year. Brilliant people. And we're presenting, and what we do is present the science, do research, do papers. And we've got a really significant outreach effort. I did almost 400 interviews in 2022 alone. There are some days doing 4 and 5 interviews a day.
Yeah, that's more than one a day. So yeah, 4 and 5 a day. Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, last year at CPAC, which was the conservative conference here uh, in the United States. I did 22 interviews over a 2-day period. So we're getting the word out there, but a lot of times we're preaching to the choir. Our challenge here is getting this information to the public. And when I talk to people, again, I'm not in the UK. I'm talking in the United States. When I talk to people here, I find almost to a person, they're thirsty for the information I'm providing about climate change because they've never heard it. They don't know that fires are actually have been in huge decline since the 20s and 30s. They don't know that sea level has only risen 8 inches, a little bit above our ankles, since 1900. They go, what? And they don't know. One of the fascinating things we'll talk about coming up here will be the sea level rise and these Pacific Island nations that are supposedly going to be underwater. It's fascinating. And it goes back to geologic processes. And so it's been a fun, wild ride for us. And we're launching another thing we can talk about in a little bit is our education initiative that we've got. We put a committee of about 15. I can't believe what we've done. We had about 15 PhD scientists that wanted to fight back against the education and to provide science to children and for children without climate alarm. And we're ready to roll out that initiative here coming up over the next couple of weeks. It's called the CO2 Learning Center. We've got a talented Brazilian artist, Tiago Hellinger. So he does the comic books that we've done are done manga style, which is like anime. Our videos are anime. You can go, if you're interested, go to CO2 Learning Center, YouTube, the YouTube channel, CO2 Learning Center. We've got our initial 4. And what we're doing is teaching, we're presenting science in a fun and entertaining way, with using fascinating characters that children just love. And so we're combining a nice, attractive thing for children to watch while they're learning. And then we also have prepared, that's what I'm doing before I get on with you, is going through final versions of our, we've developed lesson plans to go along with the videos and the books. And here in the United States, we have a whole huge homeschool movement, teaching children outside of the public school. All of my grandchildren are being homeschooled. My 5-year-old is reading at a level that's four years ahead of her contemporaries. So there's certainly so many of these homeschool, and we're going to be providing that information for people like my daughter to help them with present science to their homeschool children. So I'm really, really excited about that. We see the public's really responded well to this education initiative. So I'm not sure where you want to get started. We could start with CO2 through history if you'd like. I'm not sure. You tell me where you want to start.
Sure, there's a few things that come up as you was talking there, and one thing that really struck out to me is how well your information is being received. That was going to be a question of mine, and when you say that it's being well received, I think the first thing that goes through my mind as well, a lot of the information that people are being told is so doom and gloom, and it's like the end of the world, and it's a very depressive sort of perspective. And then you go, hey, wait a minute, the world's not actually ending. People are like, what? Well, that's good news. So
Yeah,
that's interesting.
we champion what we see is the good news of modest warming and increasing CO2. It's something that we should celebrate. We'll be going through this over the next hour, but by almost every metric we look at, ecosystems are thriving and prospering. And people haven't heard that. They don't know that. And we need to present that information. And humanity and the human condition is improving. And it's just, it's the big untold feel-good story. I think it's being hidden. They need to silence people like me. And when I talk to people too, one of the things I do is I've got a smartphone app for the phone that's got many of these facts, 60 of the top facts that I present, we'll talk about today. The smartphone app, you can download it at the App Store or Google Play. Just search for Inconvenient Facts. And that way, if you're if your idiot cousin Billy tells you that cousin Travis, did you know polar bears are going extinct? And you could pull up fact number 53, and that's actually the fact number on here that shows 60 years of polar bear population history. And you can go, here it is, here, Billy, look at this. And it's all fully sourced and referenced. And so not only do you have a chart showing this, there's a little explanation, plus you can go back and see where did the data come from? And that's important to do. You can't, anybody can put a chart up to say anything, but I link back to the original, mostly peer-reviewed scientific articles that we base it on.
Yeah, that's awesome to have a convenient app like that you can just boom straight away hit people with facts. I love that.
But again, the main thing that I want you to, it's just amazing. Virtually everybody I talk to, I travel a lot in the airport, restaurants, wherever I go. When people they go like, I go, really? They tell me more, and I do, and just almost to a person, they welcome this information, and they'll end up buying a book from me, and that's not my goal, but it doesn't hurt to sell books here and there.
Absolutely. Good information.
I'm in the process of completing my second book, and again, the focus on this book, the first book was to provide the little known facts about climate change, and this book is promoting the benefits of what's actually what we're seeing and how we should celebrate that.
Awesome, cool. Do you have a name for that yet?
I do, but you're not going to hear it.
Oh, top secret. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it is. It's so good. I don't want someone stealing it from. It'll be awesome. You can have me back on when it's ready to go.
Sure. Okay, cool. So there's an often touted statistic, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this and where it's come from. It's like 97% of scientists agree that man-made climate change is da 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 da. Where does that come from? And when you look into it, that's like way off mark, right?
Oh, it is. And if you look, it was Thomas Cook was the gentleman. He had a team of his citizen soldiers. They weren't scientists. They went back and looked at, and they concocted this 97% consensus thing. And the 97% consensus, if you look at what he was considering, I would be part of the 97% consensus. And that's because I believe that CO2 is a greenhouse gas. I believe that CO2 is increasing, mainly from burning fossil fuels. I also believe this increase in CO2 is leading to a warming of the atmosphere. I just don't think it's very much. I think it's very modest, and it's over. But I would be part. He would put me in that 97% consensus.
Okay. So
I do not know any scientists. None of the scientists of the Co2 Coalition would disagree with what I just had to say. So we're not climate change deniers. We're not saying that CO2 doesn't have a warming effect. Of course it does. It's just not very big. And we see through time, as a geologist, I like to look through thousands of millions of years. In particular, the last 10,000 years, we just see that temperature is cycled up and down and up and down and up and down, and sometimes very significantly. All the while, CO2 has been fairly stable. In fact, for the last 10,000 years, 8,000 years, temperature has been declining in fits and starts. All the while, carbon dioxide has been increasing. So how do you explain that? We have a lowering of temperature while CO2 is increasing. We see the same thing now going back to late 2015. We've seen a decline in global temperatures. We see that both in the thermometer record and the satellite temperature record is a decline in temperatures for the last 7 years. All the while, CO2 has been increasing, and it's been increasing at a slightly increased rate. Again, completely contrary to this theory of CO2-driven dangerous warming.
And so where do you think this agenda against CO2 comes from?
Well, yeah, what you're asking me, and I get asked this in a lot of interviews, is basically, why are they lying to us, is just to put it bluntly. And I'm going to tell you what I always tell everybody. I can't see inside men's and women's souls to see what their motivation is. And you and everybody watching this is just as qualified as I am to say why they're doing it. All right. You're just as qualified as I am to say why they're doing it. I'm a scientist, and I will say, my job is to say, okay, this is what you're being told about this. This is what the science, the facts, and the data tell us about that. And it's completely opposite. And so my role here is to point out not just inconsistencies, but the fallibility of what they're talking about and how wrong they are. As to why they're doing it, we can come up with all sorts of things. Is it control? Is it funding? Is it money? Who knows? I don't know, but it's happening, and people are being lied to about not only about what's going on, but also the consequences of modest warming. And it's and most of the predictions that are use climate models that are just wildly wrong and wildly overestimate temperature increase into the future.
Okay, yeah. And so you mentioned about fracking and that you are pro fracking. So there's obviously a lot of misinformation around that. Would you like to unpack some of that?
Yeah, I was at the forefront of the fracking revolution here in the United States, very earliest. And in fact, there was a fellow that did probably the most important effective documentary of all time. And I debated him in Frostburg, Maryland, in front of about 400 people, and just about everybody in the audience was anti-fracking. And I went up and I kicked his butt, and he hasn't debated anybody ever since. And
Oh,
so
damn.
the contention here back then was, and he did the movie, and I don't even want to I don't want to promote his movie, but he had a scene in the movie where he filmed someone lighting their faucet. They turned their faucet on and flames came out and lit it. And that did happen. And there was gas coming up out of that water well. That it was a well, but it was coming from a coal seam that the water well had penetrated, and there was gas in the coal seam. So there was water coming out along with the gas, but they claimed it was from fracking, which it wasn't. And what we've seen is that I've looked at, I mean, there have now been many millions of frac stages pumped in the United States. And there's never been not one documented case of fracking, the act of fracking harming fresh water. Now, the drilling is an industrial process. Spills happen that can contaminate water. A truck blows a gasket, the oil goes out in the ground. But the fracking process itself has never contaminated. And the reason is it's many thousands of feet underground, often 6 or 8 or 10 or 12,000 feet underground. And at that depth, it's physically impossible to frack into the shallow water seams that people draw the water wells from. And that's because at depth, we create vertical fractures with the frac process. And at around 2,000 feet, you can't create a vertical fracture, it goes horizontal. So you can't force that crack up above 2,000 feet. And virtually all water wells are less than 500 feet in depth. And so again, there's not been one documented case of fracking, actually the process of fracking harming fresh water.
Okay, and an often thing that's attributed to fracking is earthquakes. So is there any merit to that? Are they that severe? Because I know that there's like, I didn't know this until kind of recently actually, but the magnitude is logarithmically, right? So the higher up is actually a lot bigger than lower down. It's not like yeah. So is there much of a correlation between that?
Well, when we fracture, we crack the rock. There are microseismic events that you need highly sensitive instruments to even detect that they're happening. But the problem with earthquakes for the most part is water disposal, because you're pumping a lot of water into the shale, and as you're flowing it back out, there's a lot of water that comes to the surface, which are put in tanks and ponds, and then you need to dispose of that. And that the disposal of the water is done very, very deep, and they pump a lot of water. And there have been cases, particularly in Ohio, Rocky Mountain Arsenal, there are places in Canada where as they're pumping water at depth, it goes into dormant fault zones, and it's kind of, it lubricates them so they slip. They might not have moved in 20,000 years or 50,000 or 100,000 years, but they pump all this water, so it lubricates that fault zone. It slides a little bit. And as long as what they found in a case I know in the United States state of Ohio, they pumped into this one particular, it was a fault zone, and now they know don't dispose of water there. They dispose of water all over the state, but in that, you want to stay away from those potential fault zones. So you can do it safely and dispose of this water, but yeah, so we need to be careful and watch that. But I've not seen any indication, and I don't see how it's actually physically possible for the fracking process to create any measurable earthquakes at the surface.
Okay, so yeah, it's only in certain zones you shouldn't frack, but in general, it's a pretty safe and
Oh yeah,
okay way to
do it.
find energy. Yeah.
And it's like I say, it's been done millions and millions of times here in the United States safely.
Interesting, yeah, because there's a bit of to and fro from it happening in the UK, getting and starting up, and then yeah, there's a bit of a movement against it. So it's good to unpack the misinformation around fracking.
Yeah, and it's an incredible resource. In fact, what we looked at when I was writing the first paper on this, it was called the Marcellus shale field. We looked at the top 10 conventional natural gas fields in the world, and the top 10 largest natural gas fields in the world combined did not equal what the Marcellus shale field was. That's how big it is. I saw your eyes just went like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, wow.
That's how big it is, and there's one underneath it that's probably even bigger. And I did the first scholarly work on another supergiant field above it. So, just in this one area in the United States, we have a supergiant, and then I coined the term in 2008, mega giant. We have two mega giant fields and a supergiant field just in this one area in the United States.
Fascinating, yeah, because before I started to look into this, all I'd ever hear is that fracking's bad, it does this, poisons water, causes earthquakes, don't want fracking. So, yeah.
Well, the big difference here in the United States is people own the natural gas that's under their properties. So if you have a 100-hectare farm, well, you get all of the gas that's produced. You can negotiate a royalty. So you might get 20%. And so what we get are very wealthy people, and farmers in particular, that benefit greatly from this. We have farmers. It's a little bit different where you are. And if you're a farmer and you're not going to benefit like that, I don't think I'd want a well drill to my farm, if I'm not going to benefit. Yeah. But I understand in the UK that the farmers can negotiate access to that. I don't know the details, but that's been we've seen in the United States family farms that are saved because of the revenue that's being generated, and people being able to retire finally. My grandfather was a farmer. He never had two dimes to rub together. He worked hard, got up really early to milk the cows, and went to bed late. And it was, that the farming life is tough. And so fracking has benefited so many of the farming families here in the United States greatly.
Nice. And so, before we get on to what I'm really excited to get into, and that's going to unpack all of the best facts that I found from the CO2 Coalition's website. And if anybody hasn't checked that out yet, I'll put a link in the show notes. You definitely should check that out. It's a brilliant site with some brilliant facts here. But just before we go on to the second part, what we got here? We got yes. So okay, so that's your book,
yeah? My book, Inconvenient Facts. It's available. It's been a #1 bestseller on Amazon off and on for the past 5 years. It's just been wonderfully received, and it's
brilliant. I'll put a link there as well. People can check that out.
Inconvenient Facts, and
cool. And so just before we move on to part 2, there's just one other thing I'd like to cover, and that's the perception of greenhouse gases, and the fact that perhaps burning fossil fuels isn't actually a bad thing, which is quite a mind-blowing one. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Well, carbon dioxide, CO2, is what we call the miracle molecule. What we see again, we see Earth's ecosystems are thriving and benefiting from warming, modest warming. It's warmed about 1 degree since 1900, 0.8 of a degree really since 19, which is not too alarming to me. But what that does, and then that combined with increasing CO2 is driving vegetation growth in every ecosystem around the world, from the high latitudes to the equator. Vegetation's increasing, crop growth is exploding, and we should welcome that. And the reason crop growth is liking this modest warming, because we've lengthened growing seasons, right? The killing frosts end earlier in the spring and arrive later in the fall. Farmers can get more plantings in. Things, we just did a video, our research associate, Vijay Geologist in southern India, we just finished a video concerning agriculture in India. And even a warm nation in India, like India, has seen benefits from modest warming. And he interviewed an Indian farmer that grows carrots, and he says, now I can grow carrots basically year round. And so we're seeing an explosion of crop growth, breaking records year after year after year, not just in Scandinavia and the cooler countries, but in warm countries like India. They're breaking crop growth records. And then you're also probably your heads will explode when I say this, but in India too, and around the world, there are certain GMO crops, genetically modified crops, that are doing benefit for India because they're drought resistant. They can withstand the droughts that have plagued India for thousands of years, ever since the first Sarappan culture evolved there. Terrible droughts plagued India. So now they're able to grow different crops and benefit in that way. And we see that the increase of temperature, what we're seeing is actually a decrease in droughts. We're seeing a decrease in desert. If you look at the Sahara Desert, is decreasing. It's shrinking. There's 200,000 square kilometers in the southern Sahara. It's an area called the Sahel, where the desert is moving northward, and what was desert just decades ago is now turning into lush grassland. People are moving back and farming in those areas. All we hear about is desertification, increase in deserts. That's just not happening. But if we look during the old previous cooling periods, the most recent was the Little Ice Age, droughts were actually more prevalent in those cooling periods than in the warming periods. And that's one thing I like to, if we get time, we can talk about the strong relationship between the rise and fall of temperature and the rise and fall of the great empires and civilizations.
Absolutely. It is almost as if everything we're told by mainstream media is completely opposite to the truth. And thankfully, a lot of the truth is actually really quite positive. So thank you, Gregory, for joining me for this first part of the first ever ClimateCon podcast. And if anyone would like to listen to part 2, if you go to thegreatclimatecon.com and then become a member, you can get access to part 2. And we join me and Gregory as we get into, well, all of the facts, and more positive news about CO2, why we want more of it, and all this great stuff.